If anyone here dares play Chopin's concerto, one, I'll marry them on the spot." The young billionaire smirked, arrogantly, her voice rising above the laughter of the elites, eyes landing on the janitor holding his mop. Everyone thought it was just mockery aimed at the lowly worker. But when he quietly set the mop aside, sat at the piano, and Chopin rang out flawless note by flawless note, the hall fell into stunned silence. As even the billionaire herself froze in disbelief, Daniel stood there, mop in hand, his work boots scuffed, and his Navy janitor's uniform slightly wrinkled from a long shift. The grand hall of the mansion glittered under chandeliers, the kind of place that screamed money marble floors, gold, trimmed walls, and a grand piano that probably cost more than a house. He'd been cleaning up spills and emptying trash cans for hours, while the party swirled around him. Guests in tailored suits and shimmering dresses barely noticed him except to toss an empty glass his way or step around him like he was part of the furniture. His face, rugged and unshaven, stayed calm. But his eyes caught everything. The way people sneered, the way they whispered, the way they judged him without knowing a thing about him. 7 years ago, Daniel's life looked different. He'd been married to Sarah, his high school sweetheart, and they'd had their daughter, Lily, who was just a baby then. They weren't rich, but they were happy living in a small apartment filled with music. Daniel played the piano every night, his fingers dancing over the keys while Sarah hummed along. But then the accident happened. A drunk driver. Sarah was gone in an instant. Daniel was left with a 1-year-old and a heart so heavy he could barely breathe. He walked away from the concert halls, the competitions, the life he'd built. Lily needed him. Nothing else mattered. A woman in a silver gown, her lips curled in disdain, paused near Daniel as he scrubbed a spot on the floor. She tilted her head, inspecting him like he was a stain on her dress. "You know, they should hire better help," she said, loudly to her friend, who nodded with a smirk. "This one's practically invisible, except for the smell of cleaner." The words stung, but Daniel kept working his jaw tight. He adjusted his cap, a small gesture, but it was enough to show he'd heard. Lily, sitting nearby with her book, looked up sharply, her small hands gripping the pages. The woman didn't notice, already turning away, but the air felt heavier, like the room was holding its breath. Now at 35, Daniel was just trying to keep things steady for his daughter. He worked long hours at the mansion, cleaning up after people who'd never look him in the eye. Lily was 7 smart as a whip with her mother's curly hair and a smile that could light up a room. She'd tag along, sometimes when Daniel couldn't find a sitter, sitting quietly in a corner with her books. Tonight, she was there tucked, near the service entrance, watching the party with wide eyes. Daniel glanced at her now and then, making sure she was okay, his heart tightening every time he saw her small frame in that faded blue dress. The billionaire Cassandra Worthington was 28, all sharp cheekbones and sharper attitude. Her red dress hugged her like it was custom-made, which it probably was. She'd inherited her fortune young and wore it like a crown, her every word dripping with the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. She leaned against the grand piano, now her manicured nails tapping the polished wood, her smirk daring anyone to challenge her. The guests ate it up, laughing like she had told the funniest joke in the world. They were her audience, and she was the star. "Hey, you," a man in a tuxedo snapped at Daniel, his voice loud enough to cut through the chatter. He was mid-40s, balding with a watch that screamed, "Money, you're blocking my view. Move it." Daniel stepped aside, his mop sloshing in the bucket not saying a word. The man didn't even look at him, just turned back to his conversation about yacht prices. Another guest, a woman with a fake smile and a glass of champagne, waved her hand dismissively. Careful with that mop, honey. Don't ruin my shoes. Her friends giggled, their eyes sliding over Daniel like he was invisible. A young man, barely out of his 20s, strutted past Daniel, his designer suit gleaming under the lights. He stopped pretending to inspect the mop bucket, then turned to the crowd with a grin. Bet this guy's never even heard of Chopin, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room chuckled, a few clapping like it was a performance. Daniel's hands paused on the mop just for a second before he kept going. Lily's eyes narrowed, her small foot tapping the floor, but she stayed quiet. The young man caught her glare and laughed harder. Oh, look, the kid's mad. Cute. The insult landed, but Daniel's face stayed steady, his focus on the floor like he was carving out a space. No, one could touch. Cassandra's voice rang out again, louder this time, pulling every eye in the room. Come on. Nobody here can play shop. Not even a little. She laughed, tossing her hair, and the room laughed with her. A guy in a velvet blazer, probably some hedge fund hot shot, piped up. I studied at the Paris Conservatory, but Chopin, that's a whole other level. More laughter, like it was a game only they could play. Daniel kept mopping his movement steady, his face unreadable. Lily looked up from her book, her small brow furrowing as she caught the tone in the room. A woman with a pearl necklace, her voice dripping with false pity, leaned toward her friend loud enough for Daniel to hear. Imagine working a job like that, night after night with a kid to drag around. Pathetic. Her friend nodded, sipping her wine, her eyes flicking to Lily's faded dress. Daniel's shoulders stiffened just for a moment before he moved to another spot, his mop gliding across the floor. Lily's lips trembled, but she buried her face in her book, pretending to read. The woman's words hung in the air, unnoticed by the crowd, but heavy on Daniel's back, like a weight he'd carried for years. Then Cassandra's eyes locked onto Daniel. It wasn't random. She had been watching him all night. The way he moved quietly, the way he didn't react to the insults. She didn't like it. It made her feel small, somehow. Hey, Janitor, she called her, voice syrupy with mockery. What about you? Do you play? The room erupted with laughter, sharp and cruel. A woman in a sequined gown clutched her pearls, jiggling. Oh, Cassandra, you're too much. A younger guy, all gelled hair, and smug grin added, maybe he can play, twinkle on his mop. The crowd roared. Right now, let's take a quick second. If this story is hitting you, open your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to keep these stories going, to share what really matters. Just a tap, and you're part of this with us. Cassandra leaned on the piano, her smile wide, daring him. If you can play Chopin's concerto, nor one, I'll marry you on the spot. The room lost its laughter, bouncing off the walls. A guy with a goatee whispered loudly, nobody's that stupid to try. Another guest, a woman with a tight bun and a tighter smile, added, he'd probably break the piano. Daniel set the mop against the wall, slow and deliberate, like he was setting down something heavier than wood and bristles. He straightened up, adjusted his cap, and walked toward the piano. A server passing by with a tray of drinks paused, his eyes flicking to Daniel. He was older, his face lined with years of late nights, and he gave a small shake of his head, like he was warning Daniel not to try. Don't do it, man, he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Daniel to hear. The server's hands shook slightly, balancing the tray, but his eyes were kind, almost pleading. Daniel met his gaze for a moment, then looked away a step steady, toward the piano. The server sighed, moving on, but his shoulders slumped, like he'd seen this kind of scene end badly before. Lily watched her fingers, twisting the hem of her dress, her breath held tight. The room didn't notice at first. They were too busy, laughing, tossing back drinks, making bets on how bad he'd fail. But when Daniel sat at the bench, the chatter faltered to say hurt. His hands hovered over the keys, calloused from years of work, trembling just enough to notice. Lily watched her hands clasped tight, her eyes wide, with something between fear. Watched her fingers, twisting the hem of her dress, her breath held tight. The room didn't notice at first. They were too busy, laughing, tossing back drinks, making bets on how bad he'd fail. But when Daniel sat at the bench, the chatter faltered to say hurt. His hands hovered over the keys, calloused from years of work, trembling just enough to notice. Lily watched her hands clasped tight, her eyes wide, with something between fear and hope. Cassandra raised an eyebrow, her smirk still in place. "This ought to be good," she said, crossing her arms. A man in a navy suit, his cufflinks flashing under the chandeliers, leaned toward his date, his voice loud and mocking. "Betty learned a few chords to impress the kid," he said, nodding toward Lily. The woman beside him laughed, her earrings glinting as she shook her head. Poor thing, thinking her dad something special. Daniel's fingers paused over the keys, not touching them, yet his eyes flicking to Lily for a split second. Her small nod, barely noticeable, was enough. He straightened his back, his hands settling, ready to prove them wrong. The room didn't see it, but Lily did, and her chest rose with a quiet breath of hope. Then Daniel played. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major spilled out soft at first, then building each note clear and deliberate. The room went quiet, like someone had flipped a switch. His fingers moved with a precision that didn't belong to a janitor, a grace that didn't match the worn uniform. The music wasn't just sound. It was alive, carrying pain and beauty in equal measure. A woman in the back dropped her glass, the clink barely registering. Lily's face lit up, her small mouth forming a silent wow. A man in a corner, his suit rumpled and his tie loose, leaned forward, squinting at Daniel. He was a music critic known for his sharp tongue and sharper reviews, and his fingers twitched like he was itching to write something. "That's not possible," he muttered, his voice barely audible. He pulled out his phone, typing furiously, but his hands shook, betraying his shock. The guests around him glanced over curious, but he waved to them off, his eyes glued to Daniel's hands. The music was unraveling him note by note, and he didn't know how to process it. Lily caught his reaction, her small smile growing like she knew something he didn't. Cassandra's smirk faded, but she caught herself fast. "Okay, so he memorized one piece," she said, her voice sharp. "Big deal. The concerto's something else." A guy in a silk tide nodded, trying to laugh it off. Probably watched a YouTube tutorial. An older woman, her face caked with makeup, leaned forward. "If he's so talented, why is he scrubbing floors?" The crowd murmured, some nodding, some unsure. Daniel Day didn't stop. His hands kept moving, the nocturne swelling, filling the room with something bigger than their words. A young woman in a loud pink dress, her nails painted to match, stepped closer to the piano, her voice cutting through the music. "This is a stunt," she declared, her hands on her hips. "He's probably been practicing this one song for months, just to pull this off." She looked around expecting support, but the room was quieter now, the laughter thinning. Daniel's playing didn't waver, But his eyes flicked to her, calm and steady, like he saw right through her. She faltered, stepping back, her bravado crumbling under the weight of the music. Lily's small hand curled into a fist, her pride battling her anger. Then, without warning, he shifted. The notes changed faster, bolder, unmistakable. Chopin's Concerto on the opening. Movement. It wasn't just music. It was a storm. His fingers flew precise and powerful. Every chord hitting like a heartbeat. The guests froze. A man in the corner who'd been scrolling his phone looked up, his jaw slack. A woman with diamond earrings pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes wet. Even the server stopped trays, forgotten, caught in the sound. Lily's tears fell silently. Her pride so big, it seemed to lift her off the floor. A woman in a black cocktail dress, her hair swept up in an elegant twist, turned to her husband. Her voice low but venomous. He's making a mockery of this place. She hissed her eyes, darting to Cassandra for approval. Who? Does he think he is stealing the spotlight like this? Her husband nodded, but his gaze stayed on Daniel. His expression conflicted. The woman's words were meant to rally the crowd, but they fell flat, swallowed by the music's power. Daniel's hands moved faster now. The Concerto building in the room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in on their arrogance. Lily's eyes shone, her small frame standing taller. Cassandra gripped the edge of her chair, her knuckles white. She tried to laugh, but it came out forced. Doesn't change who he is, she said, her voice thinner. Now, a guest near her, a guy with a fake tan and a cruel grin piled on. Yeah, still just a janitor. Nice trick, though. The old woman from before hissed. He doesn't belong here. Never will. The room splits. Some still, mocking others, too stunned to speak. Lily's small hand reached for Daniel's sleeve, her voice shaking. Don't listen. Dad, you're better than them. One of the musicians hired for the night, a violinist with a tired face and a cheap tux, stood near the back, his bow dangling in his hand. He'd been playing background music earlier, barely noticed by the guests. Now he watched Daniel, his lips parting slightly, his fingers tightening around the bow. He leaned toward another musician, whispering, "That's technique you don't learn in a year or 10. His voice carried just enough for a few guests to overhear, their heads turning, their confidence shaken. He stepped closer to the piano, almost against his will, drawn to the sound. Lily saw him, her eyes bright, like she knew he understood her dad. Daniel didn't flinch. He played through the insults, the music answering for him. Each note was a defiance, not loud or angry, but steady, unshakable. A man in a gray suit, older with a face that looked like it had seen too many boardrooms, whispered to his wife, "This isn't amateur. This is Juilliard level." The word spread, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Juilliard, the name, carried weight even here. A woman in a green dress leaned forward, her eyes narrowing, like she was trying to place him. A guest near the bar, his face flushed from too much wine, slammed his glass down, the sound sharp against the music. "This is ridiculous," he barked, his voice slurring slightly. "Who let Tim touch that piano? It's worth more than his life." A few laughed, but it was weaker now, uncertain. He stumbled forward, pointing at Daniel, his finger shaking. "You think you're something special. You're nothing." Daniel's hands didn't falter, but his eyes flicked to the piano, her eyes never leaving her father. Then Daniel spoke, his voice low, cutting through the music as he paused. Crooked stood slowly. "I know him," he said loud enough for others to hear. Daniel Harper turned down a $1 million contract with the Philharmonic. Said family came first. A young man in a tailored jacket, his face pale, pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling as he scrolled through old articles. He'd heard the name Harper before, not just in music circles, but in business ones. His eyes widened as he read, his voice a whisper. He's one of those Harpers." The woman next to him overheard her glass trembling in her hand. She passed the whisper along, and it spread quiet, but electric through the crowd. Daniel's music didn't pause, but the room was shifting, the air thick with realization. Lily's small smile grew like she'd known all along. The room shifted. Eyes that he had mocked him now stared, some with shame, some with awe. Cassandra's face was pale, her lips pressed tight. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. A guest near her, a woman with a shrill voice and too much perfume, tried to keep the mockery alive. "Doesn't matter. He's still nobody. Just a janitor." But her words fell flat, drowned out by the music, by the truth settling over the room like dust. Lily stood taller, her tears gone, her small hand squeezing Daniel's arm as he played. A man in a tailored coat, his hair slicked back, slipped a piece of paper from his pocket, his eyes darting nervously. It was an old program from a concert, the name Daniel Harper printed in bold. He'd been at Juilliard, too, a lesser student always in Daniel's shadow. He crumpled the paper, shoving it back in his pocket, but not before a woman nearby caught a glimpse. She whispered to her friend, her voice low, but urgent. "That's him. That's the guy." From the posters, the rumor spread quiet, but unstoppable, like a current moving through the crowd. Daniel kept playing, unaware of his focus on the keys on Lily's small hand in his. Cassandra wasn't done. She stood her heels, clicking on the marble, her voice sharp, enough to cut glass. "Play all you want, janitor. You'll never be one of us." A few guests nodded, clinging to their superiority. A man in a pinstripe suit shouted, "Money is what matters. Class doesn't come from a piano." Another voice, younger, crueler, added, "Go back to your mop, buddy." But their words sounded hollow now, like they were trying to convince themselves. The music kept going, unstoppable, and Daniel's silence was louder than their noise. A woman in a velvet shawl, her eyes red from crying, stood quietly and walked toward the piano. She was older, her hands trembling, but she placed a single rose on the edge of the instrument, a silent tribute. Nobody laughed now. The gesture was small, but it hit the room like a thunderclap. Others watched, some shifting uncomfortably, others nodding slowly, like they were starting to understand. Lily saw the rose, and her chest puffed out her small frame, standing prouder. Daniel didn't look at the rose, but his playing softened for a moment, like he felt its weight. Lily's eyes burned, her small fists clenched. "Don't give up, Dad," she whispered, her voice fierce, despite the tears. Daniel looked at her just for a second, and his face softened. That look said everything. Love, strength, a promise to keep going. He didn't need to say it. The music did. The concerto built to its peak. Every note perfect, every phrase carrying years of pain and sacrifice. The room was his now, whether they liked it or not. A man with a silver cane, his face weathered but sharp, tapped the floor lightly, his eyes locked on Daniel. He was a retired conductor, once famous, now forgotten by most of the Probit has room. "That's not just talent," he said, his voice growly but clear. That's a... So laid bare. A few guests turned, startled by his words, but he didn't care. He leaned forward, his